Everyone saw a fairy tale bride that day, everyone except her. As Emily walked down the aisle, cameras flashed, guests gasped at her lace gown, and her groom, Daniel, smiled like the world belonged to them. But under her veil, her smile trembled. Her heart felt like glass held together only by hope. Perfect. That was the word everyone used. Perfect couple, perfect wedding, perfect future. Except Emily knew one thing: perfection was a costume, and she was suffocating inside it. It had started months earlier, when Daniel's mother, Victoria, first invited her to the family estate. "Our family has standards," she'd said, examining Emily like a jeweler studying a stone. Emily, raised in warmth and laughter, had never felt so small in a room so big. Daniel never saw it or pretended not to. She warmed up. It's just her way. But Victoria didn't soften. She molded. She measured. She controlled. Every decision, from the flowers to Emily's dress, passed through her. And every time Emily tried to choose for herself, Victoria would smile that cold, perfect smile. "Dear, remember who's welcoming you into this family now." Standing before the altar, Emily's pulse hammered. Daniel squeezed her hand, unaware of the storm behind her ribs. The priest spoke, guests held breath, and Emily tried to imagine a life where love beat louder than fear. But then, as she lifted her eyes, she saw Victoria seated in the front row, face calm, eyes sharp, expectation coiled like wire. In that moment, Emily understood. She wasn't marrying just a man. She was marrying a dynasty, a legacy, a cage built from wealth and polished manners. And yet, everyone watching believed they were witnessing a dream. Only Emily knew it was a gilded trap. And the cruelest part, it had only just begun. The honeymoon phase didn't last long. Within weeks, the perfect facade began to crack. Emily moved into the family's grand estate, a mansion with endless corridors, and rules whispered like prayers. Victoria had her own way of welcoming her: cold tea, polite smiles, and daily reminders of who truly ran the house. "A wife's duty," she'd say, "is to make her husband proud." Emily tried. She cooked, hosted, and smiled through the endless dinners filled with people who spoke in half-truths and compliments that stung. Daniel changed too. The man who once laughed with her now came home late, distracted, sometimes distant. "You're overthinking," he'd say when she asked if everything was all right. But late one night, Emily overheard him and his mother in the library. "She's not ready," Victoria whispered. "Marriage requires discipline." Emily's stomach turned cold. She wasn't a partner anymore, she was a project. Over the next days, Victoria began correcting her. How she spoke, how she dressed, even how she laughed. And Daniel, he didn't defend her. He simply said, "She means well." Emily's heart ached. Love was supposed to be a shelter, not a stage. Yet, every morning, she woke to play her part again. At breakfast, Victoria's smile was razor sharp. "How lucky you are," she'd purr, "to have a family like ours." Emily nodded, swallowing her words like stones. That night, as she stood before her mirror, still in her wedding gown from a charity event, she whispered to her reflection, "If this is love, why does it feel like loss?" Outside, thunder rolled, a warning, or maybe a promise. Deep down, Emily knew something had to change. She just didn't know how much she'd lose before finding herself again. Days turned into months, and the house began to feel less like a home and more like a museum of expectations. Every morning, Emily woke to the same silence, polished, rehearsed, empty. Her laughter was gone, replaced by the click of heels and the echo of her own restraint. Victoria had perfected the art of subtle cruelty. "You'll thank me one day," she'd say whenever she tore down one of Emily's choices. "You're learning refinement." Refinement, Emily realized, meant erasing herself piece by piece. Daniel no longer noticed. He was consumed by his career. Always out, always tired, always just out of reach. One afternoon, Emily tried to surprise him at his office with lunch. But when she arrived, Daniel wasn't there. His assistant said he'd left hours ago. That night, she waited. When he finally returned, his tie loosened and his voice sharp, he muttered, "Don't ever show up unannounced again. My work is stressful enough." That was the night something in Emily broke quietly. Like glass behind velvet, she began spending hours in the garden, her only refuge from the suffocating perfection inside. There, under the rose arch her mother-in-law had designed, she found peace in the simplest act, digging her hands into the dirt. "You're glowing lately," Victoria remarked one morning, her tone laced with suspicion. "Maybe the house is finally molding you." Emily just smiled faintly, because what Victoria didn't know was that the garden was the only place Emily could breathe, could think, could plan. She wasn't molded. She was growing slowly, quietly, like the roots under her feet. And someday soon, she would bloom in a way none of them saw coming. The garden became Emily's quiet rebellion. Every rose she planted, every leaf she tended, was a secret act of defiance against the control that tried to smother her. She began writing again to small thoughts scribbled in a hidden notebook. At first, they were just fragments. "Remember who you were, breathe, don't disappear." But soon, her words turned into strength. One evening, she overheard Victoria speaking to Daniel on the veranda. "She's too soft," Victoria said coldly. "A wife should know her place. You need someone who can represent us properly." Daniel didn't respond. He didn't defend her. He just stood there in silence, letting the words hang heavy in the air. Emily's hands clenched. That night, she walked out to the garden, her notebook pressed to her chest. "If I stay silent," she whispered to the wind, "I'll become what they want me to be." She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she wrote a letter not to Daniel, but to herself. "Dear Emily," it began, "you have been long enough. It's time to grow wild." Days later, she started volunteering at a community arts center in town, something she hadn't done since before the wedding. It was small, but it was hers. She painted again, laughed again, and for a few hours each day, she was free. When Victoria found out, she wasn't pleased. "A married woman has responsibilities," she hissed. Emily smiled sweetly. "Yes," she said. To herself, too, for the first time, Victoria had no reply. The cracks in the perfect house began to widen, and Emily was no longer afraid to let the light in. The more Emily reclaimed pieces of herself, the more the cracks in her marriage deepened. Daniel grew colder, his patience thinning whenever she spoke of her art or her work. "You don't need a job," he said one evening. "We have everything you could ever want here." Emily looked around the mansion, the gold frames, the silent halls, and realized how wrong he was. Everything except freedom, she thought. Victoria's control only tightened. She began hosting charity events, parading Emily as the perfect wife. "Smile more," she whispered during photographs. "You represent us now." Emily smiled, but behind her eyes, a plan was forming. One night after a dinner party, she found Daniel in the study, staring into his glass of whiskey. "Do you even love me anymore?" she asked. He didn't look up. "Love isn't everything, Emily. Stability matters." The words cut deeper than any shout could have. She went to bed without another word, the silence between them louder than ever. Days later, while cleaning her art supplies, Emily found a forgotten letter tucked inside one of her sketchbooks. It was from her late mother. "Asterisk, my darling, never mistake comfort for happiness. The world will try to cage you with both." Asterisk, Emily cried quietly, clutching the letter to her chest. That night, she packed a small bag not to leave. Not yet, but as a promise to herself. Freedom wasn't a dream anymore. It was a decision waiting to be made. And when the time came, she swore she wouldn't hesitate. Weeks passed, and the distance between Emily and Daniel became impossible to ignore. They shared a home, but not a life. He slept in the guest room now, always claiming exhaustion from work. The mansion felt colder with every passing day. Still, Emily didn't break. Each morning, she visited the garden, her secret sanctuary, and whispered her plans to the wind. One evening, Victoria confronted her. "I heard you've been spending time in town again," she said sharply. "That's not what a married woman of your standing should do." Emily looked her straight in the eye. "Maybe that's why I go." Victoria's lips tightened. "Don't mistake rebellion for strength, dear. Women like you need men like Daniel to survive." Emily's reply was quiet but steady. "Maybe men like Daniel need women like me to remind them what love used to mean." That night, Daniel came home early, his tone clipped. "Mother says you've been disrespectful." Emily felt her pulse rise. "Your mother has opinions. I have a life." He slammed his glass down. "This family gave you everything." Emily stood tall. "No, I built myself before I ever came here. You just never bothered to notice." The silence that followed was deafening. Later that night, she took her small packed bag and placed it near the door, not to run, but to remind herself the option existed. For the first time, she slept peacefully. The cage was still around her, but the lock. She finally realized she had the key. The next morning, Emily woke to the sound of rain against the windows. The mansion, once intimidating, now felt small, as if the walls themselves were closing in. Over breakfast, Victoria spoke in her usual clipped tone. "Your behavior has caused whispers in the community. A wife who spends time away from home invites trouble." Emily stirred her tea. "And bothered. Let them whisper. It means I'm finally interesting." Daniel glared at her, but she didn't flinch. Something in her head shifted. A quiet strength born from months of breaking and rebuilding. Later that day, she visited the art center again, only to find a surprise waiting for her. One of her paintings had been chosen for an upcoming gallery showcase. For the first time in years, her name would be her own again. She smiled, tears stinging her eyes. "You did this," her friend Lily said. "You're finally living for yourself." That night, Emily returned home lighter, freer, but freedom comes at a cost. Victoria was waiting in the parlor. "I warned you," she said, voice cold as marble. "If you walk that path, don't expect Daniel to follow." Emily's reply was calm. "Then maybe I don't need him to." Victoria's mask cracked for the first time. "You'll regret this." Emily turned away. "I already regret everything I gave up to please you." Upstairs, Daniel was silent, watching her pack the small bag she'd kept ready for weeks. "Emily," he said quietly, "you're choosing yourself over us." She looked at him, eyes clear. "No, Daniel, I'm choosing what's left of me." When she closed the door behind her, the storm outside had eased, and for the first time, the air felt like her own. Emily's new life wasn't easy, but it was hers. She rented a small apartment above the art gallery, where sunlight spilled through tall windows and the smell of paint filled the air. Each morning, she brewed her own coffee. No longer afraid of silence, it was finally peaceful, not oppressive. Her paintings began to sell, and soon, people started to recognize her not as Daniel's wife, but as Emily Hart, the artist. Freedom, she realized, didn't mean escape, it meant existence without permission. One afternoon, as she prepared for her first solo exhibit, she received a letter. The handwriting was familiar, Victoria's. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. "You've humiliated this family," the letter read. "But perhaps, in doing so, you found what we never could, courage." It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest thing Victoria was capable of. Emily placed the letter on her desk, beside a photo of her late mother. "You'd be proud," she whispered. That night, Daniel showed up at the gallery. He looked older, worn, but softer. "You did it," he said quietly. "You became who you were meant to be." Emily smiled gently. "And you?" His eyes lowered. Still learning, they stood in silence for a moment, to people who had loved, broken, and changed each other. "Take care of yourself, Daniel," she said, turning toward her canvas. "I already lost too much trying to take care of everyone else." When he left, she felt no sadness, only peace. The next morning, the gallery lights flickered on, illuminating her newest painting, a woman standing beneath storm clouds, face turned toward the light. The title read simply, asterisk behind the perfect wedding. Asterisk. The crowd that gathered saw art. Emily saw freedom. The night before the gallery reopened for her second exhibit, Emily found herself walking through the city streets alone. The noise, the lights, the movement, everything felt alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. She stopped in front of a store window, catching her reflection, confident, calm, her own. Not someone's wife, not someone's disappointment, just Emily, back at the gallery. She added one final piece to her collection, a painting of her garden from the mansion, full of wild roses growing through iron gates. The title read, Freedom Learns to Bloom. The next evening, as people filled the gallery, she caught sight of a familiar figure, Victoria. For a moment, Emily's breath hitched, but then she noticed something different. The older woman wasn't cold. She looked smaller, tired. Victoria approached slowly. I didn't come to criticize, she said. I came to understand. Emily nodded, unsure of what to say. You built something beautiful, Victoria whispered. Maybe. I was wrong to think control could replace love for the first time. Emily saw the woman not as an enemy, but as someone trapped by her own fear. You taught me a lot, Victoria, she said softly. Mostly what I'll never become. Victoria gave a faint smile and left without another word. The night ended with applause and light, and as Emily stood under the warm glow of her paintings, she realized the truth. She had lost everything she was supposed to want, but gained everything she truly needed herself. When the lights dimmed, she whispered to the empty room. Behind the perfect wedding, there was always me. Months later, Emily stood in her gallery surrounded by light, laughter, and the scent of flowers. Her story had found its ending, not the one the world expected, but the one she'd written herself. The walls were filled with her paintings, each one a memory transformed into color. At the center hung her newest piece, a portrait of a woman standing barefoot in the rain, face tilted toward the sky. The title, Becoming, reporters asked about its meaning, but Emily simply smiled. It's about learning that love doesn't always save you. Sometimes it teaches you how to save yourself. The crowd applauded, but her eyes caught something at the back of the room. Daniel, watching quietly. When the crowd thinned, he approached. You look happy, he said. I am, she replied softly. It took a long time, but I finally am, he nodded. I used to think strength was control. I was wrong, she smiled. We both were. They stood in silence for a while, not as lovers, but as people who had once broken and rebuilt. When Daniel left, Emily walked to the window, the city lights glowing like stars. Behind her, her guests toasted her success, but she wasn't listening. Her piece no longer needed applause. She whispered, almost to herself. Behind the perfect wedding lived a broken heart, but that heart learned to beat. Again, the reflection staring back at her was no longer the bride she once was. It was the woman she had become, whole, fearless, and free. Sometimes the hardest goodbye is the one that finally sets you free. Emily's story reminds us that perfection is never the goal. Peace is. If her journey touched your heart, take a moment to like this video. Leave a comment sharing what freedom means to you. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that make you feel, heal, and believe again. Because sometimes the ending isn't loss, it's becoming.